Hey everybody. So you guys have been leaving a lot of good comments on my video lately, so it only seems fair that I respond to them. I find the topic really interesting, so I appreciate all the discussion. By the way, if you never saw the video and somehow ended up here first and have no idea what I'm talking about, there's a link to it in the description. I make the case as to why I think Myst still hasn't gotten a truly fulfilling remake yet. It's just the first episode though, and I'm still working on the second one, so the case is nowhere near finished. Which means I'm also a bit handicapped replying to these comments since I can't talk about ideas I haven't covered yet. The second episode is going to be the most important episode of the three, since that's when I finally get to talk about what I call the alternate vision, which is really the whole inspiration behind the series. I don't know if you saw my community post, but this is everything that's going on right now. This right here is the video that satisfies that second part. Anyway, I can't get to all the comments, and many of them overlap in what they're saying anyway. I'm gonna go for a variety here, so some of these are new and some of these are old. Again, sorry if I don't get to yours here, but I have read them all. Alright, here's the first one. Not 4, but 8 as in 8 remakes.
8.
Myst on CD, Myst Masterpiece Edition on DVD with VOD movies, Real Myst with New Age, Real Myst Masterpiece on Unity, tablets and phones, Facebook Meta and Oculus. Yeah, okay, and here are a bunch of ports. The PlayStation, the Jaguar, the Amiga, the Frigidaire, and the Tesla. Yeah, okay, we get it. The reason I'm addressing your comment first is that you clearly have the shortest attention span of anyone here. And I know that because I basically addressed this whole point in the first 2 minutes of the video. Whether it's 4 or 8 or 65 or whatever the number is, it doesn't really matter because you're right. They all make it tough on me to make my case. And that's what I admit in the beginning. I'm saying, I know what you're thinking. I know on the surface it looks like we've explored and reimagined Myst as far as we could ever take it and possibly even too far. But what I'm saying is that every remake that's not a direct port is taking Myst down the same specific path, and as a result, I believe Myst has lost something. This is why I have to make a really long manifesto about it. It's because I know that the burden of proof is on me. Just starting the video, but did you know that Cyan was about to build a Myst replica on a real island within the Walt Disney World property in the late 90s? I don't think so? You're gonna have to tell me more. I know they had a much bigger budget back then, and also more brand recognition, but geez. So why did it fall through? I'm guessing that's when Myst came out and suddenly they realized that's what would actually happen to such a place in real life. VR is nothing wrong here. Every changed elements you list are not the VR problems. You can coach and push and pull the doors. Almost every VR does that. Please refer the gameplay of Half-Life Alyx. I have not played Half-Life Alyx. It is in my library though, so I will get to it. I agree that the lists of changes make Myst more like a game-like, and I don't like the changes either. So, if I understand your comment correctly, then I think we actually agree on this. Sorry if it wasn't clear in the video. I tried to suggest other ways they could have accommodated VR. I didn't say, I wish they didn't accommodate VR. I think they were going for a particular kind of VR experience where you didn't have to think about the controls at all, but it kind of backfired because there were too many things in the environment that just really stood out. And yeah, the sliding doors are pretty weird. Most of them would have worked just fine if they just swing on both sides of the frame. I don't know, they're overthinking it. I'm sure this is a great video, but for some reason the way you speak sounds overly scripted? You're damn right it's overly scripted, and I can sum up the reason for that in one word. Paranoia. There are so many things that can go wrong every step of the way that the only way I can manage it is to keep the script under extremely tight control. Because if I'm not careful, then something's gonna get misinterpreted, and that's gonna have a ripple effect throughout the chapter, and before you know it, the entire video is ruined. By the way, I'm not even sure what the third misinterpretation is here. I know that either she used binoculars to see the man, or he was carrying binoculars when she saw him. But I don't see the other one. Maybe saw could also mean like she hacked him up with a saw? Wouldn't that be sawed? Or maybe the word with refers to some weird romantic encounter with the binoculars? I don't know, but you see what I'm talking about? I have to do this with every sentence in the entire script and make sure none of this ever happens. Then, of course, I also have to make sure I've made every point I want to make about every subtopic without it dragging out too long, while also making sure everything is strung together in the proper order. It has to make sense both logically and from the perspective of a new viewer who hasn't heard any of this stuff before. Those are actually two different things. Alright, what was the rest of this? It's like an old TV commercial voice. Oh, you were talking about my voice. Well, that's the same thing. It's paranoia again. You probably don't know this, but I actually get tongue-tied a lot, so I have to really pay attention to my delivery. And if I don't articulate every last syllable, then some word's gonna go missing or sound like some other word, and we have that ripple effect all over again. This is also why I put in manual subtitles. I cannot afford being misinterpreted when the topic is as complex as this. And then there's also the issue of emphasis. If I emphasize the wrong word, then that can be confusing. But also the other reason I'm so particular on the voice recordings is that it's the only way I can get a consistent output. I'm recording over the course of months, but I want it to sound like it was all done in one day, and this is the only output I can make regularly. I do try to tone it down and not sound so much like an announcer, but then I start sounding sleepy, so I'd rather go with what sounds more expressive. I don't know, I'm not entirely satisfied with it either, but hey, at least it's not AI generated like a lot of crap these days. All I want is a version of the game that is fully 3D in VR that looks exactly like the original game. I think it would look so cool to walk through a version of Myst that looks like its old 90s 3D renderings. Now, you're definitely not alone in thinking that. I saw several comments saying basically the same thing. Here's another one. We'll skip the F-bomb. The ultimate remake for me would be one where the world looks and functions identically to the original but is just 3D and has higher definition textures. That's it. Is that so hard? Now, I'll definitely grant you guys that the original game certainly has a unique appeal. In fact, that's kind of my inspiration for this whole project. But you can't just say, give us the old game because it's old, because that isn't actually a real argument. And you may have noticed by now that Cyan doesn't listen to that stuff anyway. Instead, what you need to be thinking about is, what exactly is it about the old game that makes it special? And if you can identify that thing, then you might actually get something out of it. Whether it's a straight remake like you're saying, or maybe even something better. Because I'll tell you how Cyan thinks about it right now, and I kind of showed it with the clips I chose from that Making of Riven video. Cyan's attitude is, Riven is better than Myst, therefore in order to make Myst better, we have to make it more like Riven. That's the whole reason for that whole rationalism angle. That's the way Riven works, and therefore things would be better if that's how Myst worked too. You look at the original Myst and it was all clean and pretty and nothing was decaying. It was a very pleasant place to visit, but Cyan doesn't seem to care about that anymore. In fact, they almost seem embarrassed by it, as if not having that rationalism and decay somehow makes it quaint and silly or something. But now you see they have seen the light with Riven, and have since learned that all their games should try to be more like that. So if there's some other angle of appeal, you're going to have to actually argue that from scratch. You can't just say, this is how you used to do it. They don't care about that anymore. If anything, that works against you to say that. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Riven's style works really well for Riven. But I also think Myst's style works well for Myst. And these are different things, and this is exactly what I'm going to explain in episode 2. Anyway, I never addressed your main point. As far as how I feel about a straight port of the original game into modern tech, sure, I'm all for it. However, even in that case, I still think it's best if we work out this philosophical stuff first so we have a better idea of what exactly it is that we're trying to preserve. One thing about the last two remakes that has always bothered me is the lack of gloom. The original Myst has a somewhat cold look with dull colors, a cool palette, howling wind, and heavy fog. Everything's all clear, saturated, and sunny now. Now, technically speaking, I think you have a couple of those things backwards. The original Myst did not have a fog effect anywhere as far as I recall. Meanwhile, the modern version seemed almost too excited to put clouds everywhere, to the point it almost didn't really even feel genuine.
Hey guys, it's Myst! We gotta put Myst everywhere because it's called Myst!
Ugh. But as far as your real point is concerned when describing the actual effect of it, I think you're absolutely correct. The original game did seem to have sort of a darker mood associated with it, didn't it? Even if it's hard to put your finger on exactly what causes that. Meanwhile, whatever the modern versions do, they seem to lose that same effect. I think liminal is a good word to describe the quality of the original Myst's graphical atmosphere which the remakes increasingly lack. There's a liminal space aesthetic article on Wikipedia about the concept. Also Google image search for liminal space. Alright, let's take a look at this. In internet aesthetics, liminal spaces are empty or abandoned places that appear eerie, forlorn, and often surreal. Liminal spaces are commonly places of transition, pertaining to the concept of liminality. Alright, now skipping down to characteristics. Broadly, the term liminal space is used to describe a place or state of change or transition. This may be physical, e.g. a doorway, or psychological, e.g. the period of adolescence. Liminal space imagery often depicts this sense of in-between, capturing transitional places, such as stairwells, roads, corridors, or hotels, unsettlingly devoid of people. The aesthetic may convey moods of eeriness, surrealness, nostalgia, or sadness, and elicit responses of both comfort and unease. Man. Well, first of all, in a way it sounds like it's touching on something similar to that sense of gloom in the last comment, except this one is more subtle. And also, dare I say, perhaps a bit more accurate. In fact, there's a section in episode 2 where I want to try to describe the distinct mood the original game had, but I couldn't point to anything concrete. So this is going to fill a gap I had in there, which means you taught me something. And not just anything, but something I'm going to find very useful, so thank you. For that you get a heart. But wait, there's still more here. There's also a certain Alice in Wonderland-esque intrigue in being transported to a world that operates in a dreamlike fashion. Dreams are pre-articulate states of knowledge where fuller understanding is still under the process of being formed. Rationalizing everything, locking them down with this is why this is here and this is how this works, is delivering pre-made knowledge and taking away that dreamlike essence of free association. Instead of making the player go, oh, what is this? What is that? In a more profound way, the game becomes just another fictional world. Ah, now we're really getting somewhere. If I understand you correctly, are you saying that because the objects in Myst were initially conjured up in magical books, that they also represent formative ideas and are therefore not strictly bound by the same rules of material things as we understand them? Man, now you're just giving everything away. I'm gonna have to undo this now. Because that's the only way I can heart it again. This comment is that good. It deserves 2 hearts. And here's another comment that's a pretty good read. It touches on the same concepts, but this one looks at how it all fits into the broader Myst universe. Now, I will say that I personally don't really care about that stuff as much because I've always felt a lot of the later lore has forsaken what Myst originally was. But you found a good way to tie it all together without doing that, so you get a heart as well. I think my position is similar to yours in some ways, but you may also notice some differences once I finish the second episode. I don't know. I'm curious what you'll have to say when I post it. I replay the games pretty frequently, and sometimes when I'm playing through the full series again, I skip Myst in favor of your Real Myst walkthrough from years ago. I watched along when you were first putting that out, and it's always a treat rewatching your stuff and seeing your content about Myst evolve and change over time. Well, that's very kind of you. All the love's being spread around now, so of course I have to heart this one too. I mean, I can't not heart this one, right? That'd be like getting a hug and you just stand there with your arms dangling at your sides. That's pretty awkward. Now, for anyone who doesn't know about this walkthrough being mentioned here, it's something I made way back in 2009. So anyone who was around while I was still uploading that has been around a really long time. I also went back and sort of remastered it in 2019. It is a little different, and overall I like the new one better, but I've always wondered what the people who rewatch it think. Have you guys switched over to the new version, or do you still prefer the original playlist? Man, you sound so much like the YouTuber Think Before You Sleep. Well, you're not the first person to say that, so there could be some truth to it. However, I myself don't really see it, so maybe try listening to us on something other than your phone speaker. Okay, this comment's a bit long, but it goes into detail about the whole live actors versus 3D models thing. Fortunately, it's divided neatly into 3 sections. The first one explains why we don't see live actors in games anymore. Okay, buddy, I'm aware of this. I didn't expand on it too much because I wanted to save time, but here's the direct quote from the script. Obviously, if you want your character to appear properly in a 3D environment, you have to render it in 3D as well so it can be viewed from different angles. Meanwhile, I'm playing a clip where I'm sweeping side to side in front of Atris to illustrate the point. This was at the beginning of Chapter 6, and I'll admit that chapter was pretty dense because I tried to pack a hell of a lot of stuff in there. I don't know if that was the best decision, but there were a lot of things I felt were relevant to that chapter. What made it even more confusing was that I still hadn't explained the second vision yet, which is really necessary to see the whole picture. Still, these were points I wanted to get out of the way early in the series so that the later episodes could remain focused on the main topic. But what you really have to understand is that what I was getting at in that chapter was not only about the character models in isolation. It was about how it relates to everything else we've been talking about. It wasn't just that the original Myst gave us real people, it's that it gave us real people in unreal worlds. It's that combination that matters. To borrow Laku Paku's terminology, the original game gave us real people having an Alice in Wonderland experience, while the new game is giving us just another fictional character in just another fictional world. Obviously, we still have to address the practical issues, which is what the last two sections of this comment talk about, but in my opinion, the priority should be that we address them in pursuit of the right goal. So the second section of this comment lists the first solution called Stereo VR, which is that flat look that always turns to face you. Sure, it's limited, but most interactions are in books and videos, so maybe it's not so bad here. Obviously, it leaves the issue of what to do about Atris when you see him in Dunny, which I have some ideas on, but I'm not going to get into it here. Then the second idea down at the bottom is volumetric, which is pretty cool and may be the ideal solution, but this comment also remarks that it's prohibitively expensive. This is a good time for me to point out that I have never said when I'd like to see this new remake I'm calling for. The recent one is still pretty fresh, and besides, Cyan has plenty of other projects that it should probably put ahead of this one anyway. So let's wait a few years for technology to catch up a bit. I'm totally fine with that. Alright, this one I'm not going to respond to point by point. But in fairness, that's not because it waffles on and on. It doesn't. It's actually a fine read if you want to pause. But the issue is almost all of it overlaps with stuff I address in other comments. Except for this one paragraph right here. Personally, I'm largely behind the realism approach. It's not so much because I think a more magical environment, as they call it, is uninteresting or non-immersive, nor even because I think it's an invalid interpretation of the original game, but because it feels as though a more mechanical world fits more in line with the universe they built up after this first entry. Now, this whole argument that because the Myst series has evolved and has gone in a certain direction, that in order for Myst to be properly updated, it has to align itself with that direction, that's something I acknowledged early on in my Deforestation of Myst video. It seems that that is one of the major motivations for that update. And it's also something I've been planning to address in more detail in episode 2. So I won't go into everything, but basically my argument is that this is a case of the tail wagging the dog. Because it would be one thing if Myst was so poorly thought out and meaningless that it didn't really have anything going for it, and then the later material managed to flesh it out more and fill in the gaps so that Myst could grow up and become itself better than it was before. But that's not what happened. Myst was one thing. The later stuff decided to become some other thing. And now we're going back and saying Myst needs to blend in more with the other thing. It's like, okay, imagine there's this kid named Mark. And it's Mark's birthday, and Mark's going to throw a birthday party, so he invites all of his friends over, especially his best friend, Russell. And Mark is really excited to have Russell over because Russell is his best friend. But when Russell gets there, he shows up with a bunch of super soakers. Well, this is a problem because Mark does not like to play with the super soakers. But all the other kids really do want to play with the super soakers, so what happens? Well, all the kids go out in the backyard and start playing with the super soakers. So it's Mark's birthday and supposedly all about Mark, but he's stuck inside all alone because he doesn't want to do what they want to do, and they don't want to do what he wants to do. So he ends up crying in his bedroom for an hour until the parents realize what's going on. So what do? Do they say, oh, it's Mark's special day and therefore the kids should consider Mark a little bit more? No, they say Mark is the problem because he's not socializing enough. So they drag him out of his bedroom and push him out of the backyard where he gets soaked by a whole bunch of super soakers. That's Myst. You have opinions on Myst and Riven and Exile, but what about Uru? Oh, this may not be the best time for this question. Well, you can see my live reaction streaming it in 2020. There's a link to the archive channel down in the description where you can search for it. Now, if we ignore the whole discussion I'm stirring up about Myst and we just accept that Uru and Dunny are the real focal points now, I can say the main thing I liked about Uru was how the worlds look. They really were a lot of fun to explore. But I never got into the whole community thing, so I don't spend hours staring at the empty rooms saying Shora to each other or whatever they do. I have hung out with some of you guys in the online version in the past though, so maybe we can do it again sometime. It was fun. Now this one is like several comments balled up into one. It should be one per customer, but it's a long video. People have a lot of thoughts. The first thing I want to respond to is that second sentence. The new Riven looks like it's still gonna have sliding doors. How unfortunate. Is it? I mean, I saw some panels slide in the trailer, but not anything different from the original. I don't know, I haven't played the demo, so I guess we'll see in a few days. Also just read your comment about you taking a long time on episode 2. I too have to make a part 2 for what I'm working on, and I have learned I won't be doing parts ever again, or else the video won't get done. I either make it all, or I don't make it. Good luck to you on the other 2 episodes. Parts is not making it take longer. The reason I'm divvying it up into parts is for the sake of the viewer, actually. There's so much material to cover that it's like drinking from a fire hose. As the creator, even I get exhausted watching my own video back with the amount of stuff I cover. I can't imagine watching something like that straight for 2+ hours. No, the reason it's taking so long is simply that episode 2 has the part I'm most passionate about, and I really have to make sure I get it right. It's weird, this kind of abstract philosophical stuff, because as I keep thinking about it, it's still evolving. Which is a problem because if the message changes, then the whole script has to change, which means you have to throw out all the production and the whole thing falls apart. That hasn't actually happened, I'm just really careful so as to prevent that from happening. But don't worry about it. All that really matters is that I am passionate about this, and therefore it definitely will get done at some point. Now your third paragraph talks about how certain franchises get corrupted when the personnel changes. I agree this happens a lot, and I did acknowledge the staff change in the video. I don't know if you noticed, but in the diagram in Chapter 7, I actually switched out the cyan logo to indicate which team had which vision. But we also have to recognize that this shift in vision isn't entirely due to new blood. Rand has always been there, and Richard Vanderwend is coming back. Even Robin's making a reappearance. And then you say, magic works just fine in Myst because magic is just science not yet understood. Well, I may have slipped this by you, but I said at the end of the video, this is a different kind of magic that is not merely unexplained causation. But again, I have to wait until episode 2 to get into it. Sorry. The version from 2000 looks fine to me. You know, I've got a complicated relationship with that one. But before we get into it, let me make one thing very clear. No matter how much you think you love this version, there's a very good chance that you have not wasted as much of your life playing it as I have. And the number on your screen is just the one on Steam. It doesn't even include the physical copy I bought in 2000. Also, unless you're one of those people that really knows how to hack the game, then it's possible I also know the game better than you too, because I spent a lot of this time using other people's flying hacks to investigate every nook and cranny within it. This is a good time to shill once again. You can watch all the things I found in my Fly Mode series. So if you really do like this version, then yeah, maybe you should check it out. Anyway, back to this comment. You know, I thought pretty much the same thing for a very long time. It seemed faithful enough, and it provides a nice upgrade. However, when I started looking at it more carefully for this project, yes, I started looking carefully after all the Fly Mode stuff, that's when I realized this really was the version that first started pushing the whole realism thing. Just look at all the textures and you'll start to notice how corroded they tried to make everything look. It makes sense now that you think about it. This is the version that came out shortly after Riven. I think this slipped past most of us for so long because we were just so excited to finally be able to explore these worlds in 3D. and the landmarks were all pretty much in exactly the same positions as the original. Also, it was still pretty low tech, so the textures were still mostly simple flat planes. So it lent itself to the same simplicity of the original Myst, although looking back I now figure that probably wasn't the intention. Now don't get me wrong, I still love it of course. This is just something that needs to be called out nonetheless. Okay. This is the guy that downvoted the video. So let's all get in a bad mood together. Although I will say it's way more frustrating to get thumbs down without any feedback, so at least this one's telling us why they feel that way, so thanks for that, I guess.
I did not like this video. Didn't like the cadence in your voice and the downplaying it carried for this digital media treasure. I think your point as a whole is irrelevant because these versions of Myst are all separate games with different experiences that at one point all looked realistic for the time.
See, this is where we're already going off the rails. No, Myst had a magical feel at the time it was made. But now Cyan is shifting it over to archaeology or science fiction or something. Or at least they're trying to get rid of the magic wherever they can without breaking the story. I gave you the receipts. They admitted it on the dev stream and I showed you the clip.
If you want that magic not entirely explainable feel, then why not only ever just play the original? Why bother with the latest iteration?
Because I think we could take that same feeling to the next level with modern tech? Instead of poo-pooing on it and acting like it's not an important part of the experience at all like they've been doing lately? It's not complicated.
The latest Myst in VR only looks real now, but it won't in 10 years.
This sentence right here shows your fundamental lack of understanding of the situation. In your mind, every version is fundamentally the same, in that each one is realistic in its time, then becomes unrealistic after 10 years, so they come out with a new version to make it realistic again and the cycle repeats. Meanwhile, I'm just sitting here complaining about it for no apparent reason, when I could be playing unrealistic versions that are only unrealistic just because they're old. No, you're acting like this is a linear path when there's actually a fork in the road. They put the magic in the original on purpose at the time it was made, and ripped it out in later versions on purpose at the time those were made. The evidence for this was all over the video.
Myst was immersive but also magical. Myst VR is believable but also fascinating because you can't experience that place in real life. I'm not sure why that isn't good enough for you that you have to make an obnoxiously boring video about how you'd prefer Cyan's work to appeal to you. Gross. Smug. Thumbs down.
No, it's not just about me. This is why I presented the evidence and showed my reasoning and even explained outright that I know it's not just my opinion because I've been talking to other Myst fans. I guess the video is obnoxiously boring when you ignore all the arguments. You don't have to agree with me, but don't strawman what I'm saying. Wait, if there were a linear relationship between the age of the target demographic and realism, a perfectly realistic game would only be played by immortals hundreds of years old? Ah, my friend, that's why I put endpoints on the graph. But also, this isn't my opinion, just my speculation on what Cyan's opinion might be. I don't see this conflict of vision. I've always thought that Myst and Riven, combined both realism and fantasy. As the computer technology has advanced, the realistic element has come a bit more into play, but I don't think they've taken away the fantasy. The boat still comes up out of the water, we still go from world to world through a book. See, this is why I worded what I said in the script very carefully. I'm not saying they've completely gotten rid of the magic, but I am saying that their new attitude is to only keep the minimum amount of magic when it's absolutely necessary for the story. But if they can find any way to explain anything away, that's what they're switching over to now. It's interesting that you mentioned the ship, because that's a great example. If you go and watch that whole dev stream between Rand and Eric, there is a part where they talk about it. And right on cue, they start talking about how it must be some kind of hydraulics that makes the ship go up and down, and how Atris must have been some kind of brilliant engineer and all that stuff. They don't want a magical ship anymore. They want a rational one that's based in physics. The only way they'll begrudgingly hold on to any remaining magic now is simply if they cannot think of any other way around it. That's the only time. So the main thing the magic is still holding on to is what you said, it's the linking books. But I am certain that if Cyan felt they could convince you the books are actually some kind of science fiction Star Trek teleportation device, they'll switch over in a heartbeat. In fact, I'd be surprised if they haven't already done that and I just wasn't paying attention. So you're saying they added midi-chlorians? Yes. I prefer the real actors. Every Myst game after Riven was atrocious. Absolutely horrid. The property was handed off to the people who made the Journeyman project. Well... Moving on. Myst and Riven were good because they told stories through the environmental display. It was always meant to look real, especially when you understand how linking books worked and what ages were. While some alien concepts and structures would exist, they would still be grounded in realism, as the entire universe is related heavily to Earth, and Myst is intrinsically linked to Riven. Okay, this is where I just have to say, this whole word choice of realism is really unfortunate. We really shouldn't be using it. The only reason I used it was because that's what Rand Miller used when describing Riven, but the problem with it is that it suffers the same ambiguity that Myst itself suffers. What do you mean by realism? This comment is using sort of that real-life familiarity definition, but there are other competing theories about reality, so that's why I prefer rationalism for this one, because it's related to how much they're so heavily trying to explain away all the mechanisms and causation and stuff. By contrast, look at this comment. We'll start on the second line. I agree with you that realism doesn't have to mean realism, you know. I like games that are realistic in that they make sense, but they have that dreamy sense to it. Believable, but alien and new and so beautiful. I think that's why Myst 3 also appealed to me so much. Just that sweet, sweet spot in between. Did you notice how both these comments used the word alien, but went with different usages of the word realism and ended up with completely opposite conclusions about Myst 3? Right, so this comment is using realism to refer to what's really just immersion. And what that means is, it doesn't matter whether I'm wearing a VR headset or just sitting at a CRT monitor, if you can convince me that I am corporeally present within your world, then it has become real to me, and that's all that matters. In fact, if you don't put hydraulics under the ship, and I'm still convinced that I am present in your world, then you have expanded my imagination for what is possible, and have therefore created a unique and appealing experience that will keep me coming back for the next 30 years. Whereas if you do put hydraulics under the ship, you're telling me that this world functions basically just like any other, and therefore if I want to revisit that experience, I can just take off the VR headset and go outside. I mean, it's not really that simple. There are plenty of games that are based on real life, but Myst has always centered itself around world building, so setting the boundaries on what is possible there is especially important here. You've got way too much free time. No sir, I have the same amount of time as you. It's just that while you're playing Fortnite for 3 hours a night, I'm spending that same time contemplating the deep philosophies of Myst and working on how to best explain them to the public. If anything, I don't spend enough time on it, considering how long this has taken me. I think you're definitely right about the Myst remakes losing something by trying to apply the later Myst game's rationalist/realist vision to the first game. Myst wasn't designed for that vision full stop, which makes the result feel kind of fractured and confused. Like, lots of Myst, completely setting aside magical elements, is designed to be surreal and visually interesting, not rationally contextualized. Things like the spaceship with an organ in it to store a linking book, or the bizarre tree elevator, for example. These things don't hold up to rational scrutiny through a lens of narrative and logic, and within Myst that's fine. Unlike its sequels, it's not interested in rationalizing everything. So when the remakes, especially the most recent one, try to apply rationalism in the details of things like the magic paintings, they're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. So far I have nothing more to add. It's just a really good read. You'd need to completely redesign the game around a rationalist approach, throwing out much of the original ideas to really make that work and feel stylistically cohesive. It would be interesting, and I'd love to see what that would look like, but it definitely wouldn't be a remake in the normal sense. Yeah, because you would basically have to remove every single landmark on Myst Island for the reasons you just said. I will say, part of this is just the fundamental question of what purpose a remake should serve. Should it replace the original as the definitive version of the experience, or be a companion piece to the original, branching off in different creative directions? I'd say I am typically more interested in the latter. Even when a more divergent remake fails to spark the same magic as the original, I tend to respect it more than rote copying. This question you raise about what the fundamental purpose of a remake is, that's the part of your comment I want to address. Because I don't think it's actually either of those two things. In fact, my answer is kind of in the middle. I submit that the proper role of a remake is fulfillment. There is some task that the original work did not accomplish, and now we've gone back and accomplished that task. So I think that Cyan believes that by making Myst comply with their new philosophy and the later lore, they believe they have fulfilled Myst. However, there are many others, including myself, that have a completely different vision of what Myst is, and therefore we still tend to see it as generally unfulfilled. That's why we're not leaving. Now here's a comment that offers a lot of specific suggestions on how to possibly improve Myst in the next remake. Now I'm not going to go into all of them, although I like some of them, like scaling them up to be a bit larger, but the main thing I want to focus on is that last sentence in the first paragraph. It feels like every version makes a lot of things better and some specific aspect decidedly worse. See, if you're not anchored in anything and just kind of let your creativity flow in whatever random direction, you might end up making a product that you're satisfied with, but then the next guy down the line is going to be like, wait a minute, why is all this stuff here? I don't remember this. So you may have just explained the phenomenon in your own comment. While the developers might think everything is a strict improvement, somebody else is going to be like, well, this part's better, but this part is decidedly worse. That's why I'm trying to keep the scope of the discussion very limited. What is the core identity of this game, and what is it about the original game that keeps people coming back to it no matter how much time has passed? And in line with the previous comment, how then can that identity be fulfilled in more vibrant ways than what the original technology allowed? Considering what we already have and how people are reacting to it, I think that's the most pressing issue now. And I believe that if this question's answered properly, then that's how you catch the most flies in the smallest trap. Because if you're really just interested in freeform world building and don't want to be so tied down to the past, you might as well just make a completely new game. And I think that's what they should be doing right now. They should absolutely get more creative works under their belt and only come back to this when the question is properly answered. So you say 26 or 27, no, it's already 24, so I'm thinking more like 29 or 30. 1352, that's when I flashed this on the screen. Rationalist indeed, because it robs everything magical about the original. Myst in the new vision wouldn't have sold 5 million copies. Ooh, you just said the quiet part out loud. Yeah, I'm gonna have to heart this one too. Proof being other games with realism rationalized into the mix contemporary to Myst. For shame that Cyan can't see the forest for the trees, despite deforesting the island so badly. It will soon turn into an Easter Island, complete with Moai stones. I noticed that you left that Easter Island remark in multiple comments, so I understand what you're doing, and it's kind of clever. Because on the surface it's clearly a reference to my own deforestation video, but you're also using it to describe what you see as a much broader hollowing out of the soul of the game over time. So it's kind of a neat double purpose there. They should make a Myst real-time that looks just 99.99% like the original renders. See, there's another one. It has that realistic/surreal imagery that roots in reality but always looks slightly off, i.e. the water doesn't quite look like water but more like a metallic mirrored surface. Right, there's your conflict of visions. The water is a great example. Now, my plan was to talk about it more in episode 3, so I myself would kind of rather wait until then to get into it. But yeah, should a remake strive to accentuate that metallic look as you called it? Or is the goal to more accurately portray water we already know now that we can? In the rationalist vision, water is water, so they just copy-pasted the same texture across all the ages, instead of preserving the unique variety the original ages had. Fortunately, it looks like they might actually be trying to do some custom stuff with the water on Riven, which is also supposed to have a unique kind of water. But again, I've only seen the trailer, so I guess we'll see. I actually find the newer graphics to be less realistic looking. There is something about the soft, painterly lighting of Unreal Engine that just doesn't really capture how real light and materials work. It looks like clay or dough. Well, that would be really unfortunate if it's the engine's fault that our options are restricted and making things more cookie cutter. I don't know, I don't have any experience with that stuff. And despite the primitive models and textures and the low resolution of the original images, the way they are lit gives a sense of something real and tangible on the other side of the camera, a sense that these objects are solid. And it's when you combine that solid realism with the slightly off-kilter, somewhat alien way that things tend to work, you get something hyper-real, something beyond ordinary reality. Yeah, that sounds like what I was trying to describe in Chapter 7. Both the red and blue circles were large, not just the blue one. And isn't that interesting? In your mind, both versions deviate from reality, but one in a good way and the other in a bad way. Kinda reminds me of the clips I showed of Robin Miller from the Making of Riven video. Did you notice how he referred to both the old graphics and the new graphics as strange? But one in a good way and the other in a bad way? But his take was kind of the opposite of yours. None of the remakes except for Masterpiece Edition have captured that feeling. Now, do you mean Myst Masterpiece or Real Myst Masterpiece? I'm going to assume Real Myst Masterpiece because Myst Masterpiece is basically just a port, so that wouldn't really be saying anything. Now, assuming you are talking about Real Myst Masterpiece, well, I've said many times in the past that I have a lot of issues with that game, but to your point, I will say that I agree that Real Myst Masterpiece kind of broke the trend and didn't seem as hyper-focused on rationalism as either the original Real Myst or Myst VR. I didn't say this in the video because it was just a slight bump in the trend and not a full reversal, so there really wasn't any point and it would have just complicated the issue. I don't know if you know this because I didn't for a long time, but apparently there's a direct trail of development from Real Myst into Real Myst Masterpiece. I thought Masterpiece was made from scratch, but apparently it wasn't. If you haven't played the mobile version of Real Myst, then I suggest you check it out, because in my opinion, it has a lot of the best of both desktop versions. I thought Life is Strange didn't actually have a realism-based art style. I was hoping nobody would bring this up. Yeah, you're right, it's a bad example. It was really just kind of an inside joke because I was streaming it for the lulz while getting drunk during supporter hangouts, so I wasn't really paying attention. Which, by the way, everyone should follow me on Twitch. The link is down below. If you're watching this the day it was uploaded, we're having our monthly hangout tomorrow where we'll probably talk about this stuff and maybe even a little bit about the upcoming Riven remake. Also join the Discord. The most compelling stories and works of art have dark corners, mysterious unreachable terrain, and gaps in the story. The whole picture isn't available, and this leaves much to the user's imagination. Entertainment these days is so focused on illuminating the entire universe with backstory and filling in the map that the magic and mystery is often compromised. Honestly, I think technical limitations can and have inadvertently enhanced the sense of surreality. You know, I tend to think tech advancements provide strict improvements to our potential without any trade-offs. But you argued something pretty well that might have just thrown a wrinkle into it. Of course, you understand that 3D environments inherently give the player more control, and players tend to like that regardless of how much the devs want to give away. It just kind of comes with the territory, it's not the result of any wider cultural trends. So if you take away the 3D aspect, or severely limit the player's navigation within it, then I don't really see the point of a remake at all. The only thing I can think of is to try to preserve that feeling in the other ways, like incomplete narratives, which fortunately Myst has also. And this is a comment that has a lot of things to say. It talks about some games, a series of books, some raw emotion, and... Alright, I'll just say I read this several times, and it took me on a fascinating journey each time, but I'm not sure where I ended up. But I appreciate the passion, and thank you for sharing. Alright, that's plenty of comments, so I think I'll leave it there, and I'll see you all next time. Good work, everyone.